Anthony Walgate, a 23-year-old fashion student with a bright future, was strolling through the busy streets of London on a pleasant summer evening in June 2014. He came home with a gleam in his eyes from his hopes of success in the fashion industry. His friends and family were unaware that this would be the last time they would see him alive. Anthony's body was found dead a few days later in Barking, East London. It appeared to be a tragic accident at first, but the reality was much darker. What transpired would reveal a horrifying tale of dishonesty, carelessness, and unspeakable cruelty, revealing serious weaknesses in the structures designed to safeguard society's most defenseless members. This is the tale of Stephen Port, a man whose deeds would shock the country and expose the fatal results of institutionalized bigotry and indifference. Born in Southend-on-Sea, Essex, on February 22, 1975, Stephen Port and his family relocated to Dagenham, East London, when he was just a year old. Known as a loner, he experienced bullying in school and was described as quiet by past teachers. His odd infantile conduct was observed by his neighbours, such as playing with children's toys as an adult. Due to financial difficulties, Port quit school at the age of 16 to pursue training as a chef, instead of attending an art college. He lived with his parents until his early 30s, before relocating to an apartment in Barking, London. He was employed there as a chef at a West Ham stagecoach bus facility. Additionally, Port appeared briefly in an episode of the television programme MasterChef. He kept up an athletic image by going to the gym on a regular basis and covered his baldness with a professionally fixed blonde toupee. He was known to be socially uncomfortable, and he frequently found it difficult to build sincere relationships. Rather, he used social media and online dating apps to find young men who were at risk. He was a gay. An internet escort ad introduced Stephen Port to Anthony Walgate. Port gave Anthony GHB, or gamma-hydroxybutyrate, during their contact. GHB is a powerful substance that is frequently linked to sexual assault, since it may render victims unconscious.
Stephen Port tells the police that he's found him there, that he's found this young man, and he thinks he must have collapsed through drugs or through some other medical calamity.
Anthony was rendered helpless and senseless by the medicine. Port used the circumstance by sexually abusing Anthony. Unfortunately, Anthony died from the overdose before he could fulfill his aspirations. When confronted with the corpse, Port opted for dishonesty over responsibility. He dragged Anthony's body outside his apartment and left it close to the building's entrance rather than phoning for assistance. Port staged the scene in an effort to give the impression that Anthony had died of a heroin overdose on his own. He reported the body to the police early the following morning in an unnervingly composed and aloof manner. Port acknowledged moving the body when questioned, but he said he did it because he was afraid of being implicated. He was arrested for perverting the course of justice after his explanation sparked suspicions. However, investigators did not look more closely into Anthony's death's circumstances. They failed to identify the staged nature of the scene or link Port to the fatal overdose. Because of the absence of a comprehensive inquiry, Port's evil intentions were overlooked. He was able to avoid justice because of this crucial shortcoming, which also laid the groundwork for the atrocities that would transpire. Instead of being a pivotal moment, Anthony's death served as the beginning of a string of avoidable catastrophes. In August 2014, just 2 months after Anthony Walgate's death, Stephen Port struck again. His next victim was 22-year-old Gabriel Kovari, a Slovakian who had recently moved to London, hoping to build a better future. Gabriel was friendly, outgoing, and ready to make new friends. When Port offered him a place to stay, Gabriel had no idea he was walking right into a trap. 2 days later, on August 25th, Port carried out his chilling plan. He drugged Gabriel with GHB, the same drug he'd used to kill Anthony. Gabriel quickly fell unconscious, and Port took advantage of him, assaulting him while he was defenseless. Afterward, with no emotion, Port began to dispose of Gabriel's body. He took Gabriel's lifeless body to St. Margaret's Church in Barking, just a short distance away. There, Port staged the body in a creepy, deliberate pose, as if setting it up like a grotesque display. He discarded Gabriel's phone, planted a bottle of GHB nearby, and tried to make the scene look like a drug overdose. When Gabriel's friends started asking questions, Port lied, telling them that Gabriel had just walked out and disappeared. For a while, this lie worked, keeping suspicion at bay. But when the police investigated Gabriel's death, they failed to connect the dots. They saw it as just another drug-related tragedy and didn't think to check the strange circumstances, like the way Gabriel's body had been staged or how his personal belongings were missing. Even though both Anthony and Gabriel had GHB in their systems, the police couldn't link the two cases. Because of this, Port was able to remain free and continue his deadly spree. Less than a month after Gabriel's murder, on September 18, 2014, Port found his next victim, 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth, a talented chef from Gravesend, Kent. Daniel had a close-knit family and was loved by his friends. He met Port on a dating app and agreed to meet him, never knowing it would be the last time he'd ever see his family. Port followed his usual method. He drugged Daniel with GHB, leaving him unconscious and vulnerable. After sexually assaulting him, Port moved Daniel's body to St. Margaret's churchyard, the same place where he had dumped Gabriel's body just weeks before. This time, Port went even further to cover his tracks. He placed a fake suicide note next to Daniel's body, claiming that Daniel was responsible for Gabriel's death and couldn't live with the guilt.
There was no reason for us to look into that. We was also told that all the deaths were not connected, which obviously is not true, because in the suicide letter stated that Daniel had supposedly killed Gabriel. So it was connected. We was told there was no connection.
The note was a complete lie, crafted by Port to shift blame away from himself. The police unfortunately bought the story. They didn't check the handwriting on the note or look into the strange circumstances surrounding Daniel's death. Instead, they treated it as an isolated suicide and moved on. This was a massive failure.
And in this note, he expressed not only his sorrow for committing suicide and upsetting his family and his friends by that, but saying that the trigger for it was the fact that Gabriel had died.
By misclassifying Daniel's death, the police let Port continue his killing spree unchecked. Daniel's family was heartbroken and confused by the lack of answers, but Port was still out there, actively searching for his next victim. It wasn't until more than a year later that Stephen Port struck again. During that time, he stayed active on dating apps like Grindr, targeting more vulnerable young men. In September 2015, Port murdered his fourth and final victim, 25-year-old Jack Taylor. Jack was a forklift driver from Dagenham, known for his warm personality and close bond with his family. On the night of September 13th, Jack met Port after connecting on a dating app. He made his way to Port's flat in Barking, unaware that it would be his last journey. As he'd done before, Port drugged Jack with GHB, knocking him unconscious. After Jack died from the overdose, Port took his body to St. Margaret's churchyard, the same place where he'd dumped Gabriel and Daniel. To cover his tracks, Port staged the scene, placing a bottle of GHB next to Jack's body and arranging it to look like a drug overdose gone wrong. He even planted medical supplies to make it seem like a drug accident. The scene was eerily similar to how he'd staged the others. But this time, things were different. Jack's family didn't let it slide. They were immediately suspicious when Jack didn't return home, and they pushed the police to investigate more seriously. The investigation finally began to connect the dots. The similarities between the deaths, young men, drug overdoses, and suspicious circumstances began to add up, and soon Stephen Port's name was at the center of it all. Port was arrested in October 2015, and his horrifying pattern of deceit, manipulation, and murder was exposed. By then, it was clear Port had used dating apps to lure young men to their deaths, drugging them with GHB before sexually assaulting them, and then staging their bodies to look like drug overdoses or suicides. In 2016, he was convicted of all 4 murders and sentenced to a life sentence, ensuring he would never harm anyone again. But the damage was done, and the families of his victims had to live with the painful truth that the police had failed them time and time again. Stephen Port's story is one of horror, but also a warning about the dangers of complacency and how the failures of the system allowed him to continue his killing spree unchecked. It's a tragic reminder that justice must be vigilant and thorough, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable the truth may be. Jack's disappearance didn't go unnoticed. His family was quick to realize something was wrong and immediately contacted the police when he didn't return home. Unlike some of Port's previous victims, Jack had a solid support network that refused to settle for vague or unsatisfactory answers. Jack's sisters, especially, became relentless in their pursuit of the truth. They pushed the police to take the case seriously and demanded a thorough investigation.
Boys was not treated like individual humans, and we've said that they were discriminated against from the very beginning, whether that had been they were just seen as a druggie, homeless, gay. It's not acceptable.
Their persistence paid off, and soon investigators started to uncover the chilling similarities between Jack's death and the others. The case was eventually picked up by the Metropolitan Police's Major Crime and Homicide Department. As the evidence began to pile up, it became impossible to ignore the disturbing patterns emerging from the deaths of Jack, Daniel, Anthony, and Gabriel. The pressure from Jack's family and the media finally led the police to connect the dots. It was a turning point in the investigation. Forensic evidence played a crucial role in linking the murders. Toxicology reports revealed the presence of GHB, the drug Port had been using on his victims. Digital evidence and witness testimonies confirmed that Port had been luring young men through dating apps like Grindr, inviting them to his apartment under false pretenses. By October 2015, the weight of evidence was undeniable. Stephen Port was arrested and charged with the murders of all 4 men.
Of the male that we just spoke about a short while ago, Gabriel Cavari or Gabriel Klein.
No, I didn't know that.
So, were you involved in administering any drugs or poisons or noxious substances to him?
No, I don't administer drugs to anyone or give drugs to anyone. That's done at the party by someone else, the name I recognised.
During his trial in 2016, a chilling portrait of his cold-blooded actions emerged. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including testimonies from survivors who had narrowly escaped Port's clutches. These survivors shared how Port used GHB to incapacitate them, ensuring he had complete control over his victims.
He does, like when I did, Scott would ask him to pick up guys, take them to a party, and he would stay, but he would stay and minister or do out hand out drugs, whatever. But I would leave, but he would stay.
The details of Port's crime scene staging were also revealed. He had planted bottles of GHB and fabricated suicide notes in a twisted attempt to mislead investigators. His calculated efforts to make his victims' deaths look like accidents or suicides showed just how little regard he had for human life. In November 2016, Stephen Port was convicted of all 4 murders as well as multiple charges of sexual assault and rape. He was sentenced to life in prison, ensuring he would never be able to harm anyone again. But while the conviction brought some justice to the victims' families, it also exposed significant failures within the Metropolitan Police. Relatives of the victims accused detectives of missing key warning signs, such as the similarities in the crime scenes and the fact that all the deaths were staged.